In 1798, a 30-year-old French general sailed to Egypt with 40,000 soldiers, a fleet of warships, and one book. He had read it 17 times. He would read it again on the voyage. He had carried it through Italy, through his first command, through every campaign that had turned him from an unknown Corsican into the most feared military mind in Europe. The book was not about war. It was not about strategy. It was not a manual. It was a collection of biographies, written by a Greek philosopher named Plutarch nearly 2,000 years earlier. It told the lives of great men, Alexander, Caesar, Pericles, Alcibiades, and it did not simply record what they did. It examined how they thought, why they failed, and what destroyed them. Napoleon did not read Plutarch for entertainment. He read it the way a surgeon studies anatomy, because the knowledge was a matter of life and death. Plutarch was born in the Greek town of Cheroneia around 46 AD, when Rome ruled the known world, and Greece was a memory of its former glory. He studied philosophy in Athens, traveled to Rome, and spent most of his life writing. But he was not interested in writing history the way we understand it. He was interested in character. His method was devastatingly simple. He took two great men, one Greek, one Roman, and placed their lives side by side. Alexander next to Caesar, Demosthenes next to Cicero, Pericles next to Fabius Maximus, not to decide who was greater but to reveal how character shapes destiny. The same ambition that made one man a legend made another a tyrant. The same courage that won one battle lost the next. Plutarch wrote 48 biographies in total, covering the span of 1,000 years of Greek and Roman civilization. He recorded how Pericles transformed Athens into the greatest city in the ancient world through patience and restraint. He recorded how Alcibiades, the most talented Athenian of his generation, destroyed himself through arrogance and betrayal. He recorded how Hannibal crossed the Alps with elephants and brought Rome to its knees, only to be undone by a Senate that refused to send him reinforcements. Each life was a case study. Each decision was a lesson. And Plutarch did not tell you what the lesson was. He showed you two men, side by side, and let you draw your own conclusions. This was the insight that gripped Napoleon. History was not a sequence of events. It was a catalogue of decisions, and those decisions were driven by the character of the person making them. Study the character, and you could predict the decision. Predict the decision, and you could win the war before it started. Napoleon was obsessed with Alexander the Great, not simply because Alexander conquered an empire by the age of 30, although that certainly appealed to a man who planned to do the same, but because of how Alexander handled the moments that could not be solved by force. When Alexander's army mutinied at the Hydaspes River, refusing to march further into India, he did not punish them. He did not threaten them. He retreated to his tent and waited. 3 days later, the army came to him, ashamed, and begged him to lead them wherever he wished. Napoleon understood what Plutarch was showing him. Alexander knew when to stop pushing. He knew that the most powerful act of leadership is sometimes silence, letting the weight of loyalty do what orders cannot. But there was another lesson in Alexander's life that Napoleon studied even more carefully. Alexander never lost a battle, not one. He defeated the Persian Empire, the largest the world had ever known, with an army a fraction of its size. He did this not through superior numbers, but through superior positioning. He chose where to fight, he chose when to fight, and he made those choices based on an obsessive study of the terrain, the enemy commander's personality, and the morale of both armies. Napoleon absorbed this completely. At Austerlitz in 1805, the battle he considered his masterpiece, he deliberately weakened his right flank to lure the Allied army into attacking it. When they committed their forces to the trap, he struck the center with everything he had and split the enemy army in two. 73,000 French soldiers defeated 85,000 Austrians and Russians in less than 9 hours. It was a plan that Alexander would have recognized instantly. Plutarch had given Napoleon the template. Austerlitz was the execution. Years later, when Napoleon's own troops faltered during the Italian campaign, he used Alexander's other technique. He did not rage, he withdrew, and the army, terrified of losing him, rallied. He had not invented any of this. He had read it in Plutarch, he had studied it. And when the moment came, he recognized the pattern and applied it. Caesar's life in Plutarch gave Napoleon something different, a lesson in speed. Caesar moved faster than any general in Roman history. He crossed the Rubicon before anyone knew he had made the decision. He arrived in battles before his enemies knew he had left the previous one. He marched his legions through Gaul at a pace that his own officers considered reckless, and won every time because the enemy was never ready. He understood that in politics, as in war, the person who acts first controls the terms. While his rivals in Rome debated what to do about him, Caesar was already at the gates. While Pompey assembled a strategy, Caesar had already executed his. Napoleon adopted this principle as doctrine. His entire military philosophy was built around speed, moving armies faster than anyone believed possible, arriving before the enemy was prepared, striking before the defense was set. He reorganized the French army around this single idea. Corps moved independently, converging on the battlefield from different directions, giving the enemy no time to react and no single point to defend. But Plutarch also showed Napoleon how Caesar died. The man who moved faster than anyone, who trusted his instincts more than any counsel, who believed his speed made him untouchable, was killed by men he had pardoned, men he had trusted, men who stood close enough to hand him a letter and then a knife. Caesar had conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, been declared dictator for life, and then walked into the Senate without a guard on the Ides of March because he believed that clemency was the same as safety. It was not. Napoleon read this passage repeatedly. He understood the warning. Speed without caution is suicide dressed as courage. Trust without verification is an invitation to betrayal. And yet, this was the lesson Napoleon would ultimately fail to learn. His own downfall came from the same flaw that killed Caesar, the belief that he could move faster than consequence. What made Plutarch dangerous, and what made Napoleon so effective, was not any single biography. It was the accumulation. Read one life, and you have a story. Read 50, and you have a system. Napoleon began to see patterns that repeated across centuries. Every great leader who rose too fast was destroyed by the jealousy of those around him. Every conqueror who ignored supply lines eventually starved. Every ruler who confused loyalty with obedience was betrayed the moment he showed weakness. Every general who fought one campaign too many died in a foreign land, wondering how his luck had changed. These were not theories. They were observations drawn from actual lives, people who had made actual decisions with actual consequences. Plutarch had assembled 2,000 years of human trial and error into a single book, and Napoleon treated it as a field manual. Before every major decision, Napoleon would ask himself what the great men of antiquity would have done. Not because he worshipped them, he considered himself their equal, and in some cases their superior, but because he understood that the problems of power do not change. Only the weapons change. The psychology remains the same. A general in 300 BC faced the same core challenges as a general in 1800. How to inspire loyalty, how to maintain discipline, how to manage rivals, how to know when to fight and when to negotiate, how to survive victory, which Plutarch considered far more dangerous than surviving defeat. Hannibal's life taught Napoleon about the danger of fighting far from home without political support. Hannibal won every battle in Italy for 15 years and still lost the war because Rome simply refused to accept defeat and Carthage refused to send reinforcements. Napoleon noted this. He built his empire with one eye always on Paris, knowing that a victory on the battlefield meant nothing if the politicians at home turned against you. Pericles taught him about the power of restraint. Pericles made Athens the greatest city in the ancient world, not through conquest, but through patience, building walls instead of armies, investing in culture instead of war. He knew that the greatest victories are the ones you never have to fight. Napoleon understood this intellectually. Whether he was capable of practicing it was another question. Napoleon was not unique in reading Plutarch. He was simply the most successful example of a tradition that stretched back 2,000 years. Alexander Hamilton read Plutarch as a teenager on the island of Nevis in the Caribbean, a penniless orphan with no connections and no future. He read about the great men of Greece and Rome and decided that he would rather risk everything for glory than accept the life he had been given. He sailed to New York, fought in the Revolution, built the American financial system, and died in a duel at 49. Plutarch would have understood every choice he made. Thomas Jefferson kept Plutarch on his bedside table. He studied the fall of the Roman Republic while drafting the constitution of a new one, and he was haunted by the parallels. Elizabeth I studied the lives as part of her education and used its lessons to manage a court full of men who wanted her throne, her hand, or her head, playing them against each other with a patience that Pericles himself would have admired. Frederick the Great of Prussia slept with a copy under his pillow. He annotated every page. He said that Plutarch had taught him more about war than any living general. For nearly 2,000 years, Plutarch's Lives was considered the essential education for anyone who intended to lead. It was not optional reading. It was the foundation. Kings studied it. Generals carried it. Revolutionaries quoted it. The men who built the modern world, from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment to the American founding, were raised on Plutarch's biographies the way children today are raised on whatever the algorithm recommends. Then it stopped. At some point in the last century, the study of great lives was replaced by the study of systems, structures, and theories. Leadership became something you learned in a course, not something you absorbed from the people who had actually done it. The idea that you could learn how to act by studying how great people acted, the idea that had driven Western civilization for 2 millennia, was quietly retired. The biographies are still there. Every life Plutarch recorded is still available. Every lesson Napoleon extracted is still in print. The patterns he identified, the ones that made him emperor, have not changed, because human nature has not changed. But the practice of reading them, of studying them the way Napoleon studied them, obsessively, repeatedly, extracting every decision and asking why, that practice has almost disappeared. There is a final irony in Napoleon's relationship with Plutarch. He read the Lives 17 times. He memorized the mistakes that destroyed Alexander, Caesar, Hannibal, and every other great man whose ambition outran his judgment. He knew exactly how empires fall, from overreach, from arrogance, from the fatal belief that the rules apply to everyone except you. And then he invaded Russia. In June of 1812, 600,000 men, the largest army ever assembled in European history, crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory. Napoleon expected a decisive battle within weeks. The Russians refused to give him one. They retreated. They burned their own crops, their own villages, their own cities. They gave Napoleon nothing but empty roads and scorched earth. By the time the French army reached Moscow in September, it was already dying. Moscow was empty. The Russians had abandoned it, and then they burned it to the ground. Napoleon sat in the ruins of a city he had conquered and waited for a surrender that would never come. The retreat from Moscow is one of the most horrific episodes in military history. Temperatures dropped to -30. Horses died by the thousands. Soldiers froze in their sleep. Cossacks picked off stragglers. Of the 600,000 who had marched east, fewer than 100,000 came back. It was the exact mistake Plutarch had warned about in Life After Life After Life. Hannibal fighting too far from home. Alexander pushing beyond the limits of his army's endurance. Every conqueror who believed that one more campaign would secure everything, and lost everything instead. Napoleon knew the pattern. He had studied it. He had lectured others about it. And when the moment came, he believed he was the exception. He was not. Plutarch would not have been surprised. The Lives are full of men who understood the theory of destruction perfectly and walked into it anyway. That, perhaps, is the most important lesson in the book. Not how great men rise, but why knowing how they fall is never quite enough to stop you from falling the same way. Napoleon was exiled to Elba. He escaped. He returned to France for 100 days of desperate, brilliant, doomed glory. He was defeated at Waterloo and exiled again, this time to St. Helena, a rock in the South Atlantic, where he would spend the last 6 years of his life dictating his memoirs and arguing with his jailers about the quality of the wine. He died on the 5th of May, 1821. He was 51 years old. He had reshaped the map of Europe, rewritten the legal code of France, and been defeated by the oldest pattern in Plutarch's book. The book survived. It always does. If you made it this far, you think differently. Like and subscribe. We go deeper every week.